everyone. Welcome back to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion with Dr. Anahy, who joins me today to talk a little bit more about the elusive ego. What is it? Why should we even talk about it, Dr. Anahy? But I wanted to tell everyone here who doesn't know, this program is brought to you by several organizations, AMI Brasil, the United States Spiritist Federation, the TV Mansão do Caminho, my apologies, and the International Spiritist Council. And if you haven't done so already, please do hit subscribe so you can get notifications of our programs. And if you'd like to check other channels, please check us out at spiritist.us. Finally, if you have any questions or comments, please just send us those comments, feedback, and you can use the chat window because we would love to address them. And if we don't have time today, we will address them in a future episode. Um, the subject today is mostly coming from, of course, The Conscious Being by Joanna de Angelis, and the book Reflecting the Soul. That book is in the process of being published in English. So love to tell you when it's here for us to buy, so you can read it. But I wanted to say, Anahy, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. Very happy to be here with you all.
Awesome, awesome. So Anna is going to be here talking to you about the ego, the second part of our conversation. But I wanted to bring a quote that Anna mentioned last week, right? So she said, this is from Joanna de Angelis, and roughly, Joanna states that. Let me say this slowly because it's packed full of content here. Joanna told us the conquest of consciousness is a very painful birth of the unconscious, which continues to hold a significant part of the psychic contents that the ego needs and must assimilate. In that moment, when it becomes aware of the portentous repository and begins to express itself through it, consciousness manifests itself. So it's almost like we have a sci-fi movie here, Anahy. We talk about overcoming and achievement, and we talk about consciousness, we talk about pain, we talk about unconscious versus conscious, and in the middle of it, we talk about our topic of our discussion, the ego. So tell me, or tell us what happens when the ego faces the content of the unconscious. Can we talk about it?
Yes, we must talk about it, actually. We all need to talk about it. But before that, I just wanted to bring, I was listening to Marcia, and it reminded me of a sentence by Joseph Campbell,
Hmm.
who we all know that he was a very good friend of George Lucas from Star Wars. And the last episode, Marcia and I were talking about we also talked about the hero myth when we say the myth of the hero. And
Hmm.
it has a lot of to do with this development of consciousness that Joanna is saying, this sentence that Marcia brought to us, the painful birth of the ego and the need that the ego has to assimilate, to get in contact with these contents in the unconscious, because the ego is like this, it's the center of consciousness, okay?
Hmm.
And so it actually is classifying, or we could say um, is actually is responsible for what comes in our consciousness, and also for what it goes down to the unconscious, as if we could say. So when the ego is afraid of something or cannot deal with something, it doesn't allow this something to get in consciousness, okay? And what's going to happen is that it will use the mechanisms of defense that Freud and Anna Freud were the ones that actually classified the mechanisms of defense, the ego's mechanism of defense, and to defend itself actually, and to put this contents, what is threatening it, the ego, to go back or to really put it in the unconscious. But I like very much this Joseph Campbell sentence when he says, how to get rid of the ego as a dictator and turn it into a messenger, a servant, and a patroller to serve us. That's the trick. I like
I
that
think
very.
that sums it all up, right? If we remember nothing but this sentence by Joseph Campbell, we are good to go. It's the reversal of roles between a dictator or it and everything else is under its own guidelines. I wanted to maybe ask for just a second here. Anahy, could you perhaps correct me because this is how I see where if you think in terms of this enormous triangle that is the iceberg, perhaps, right? And here, right at the tip, there is the line of the ocean where this enormous iceberg lies. And when we talk about the center of the conscious is really the middle of that what is seen above the ocean, and everything else is your unconscious, which means we really know very little about ourselves. Is this a correct representation?
Yes, it is. I like very much this image. Of course, it is a little bit different from Freudian point of view and from Jungian point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But the iceberg, for Freud, for instance, the what is above the surface in the iceberg would be the consciousness, and the ego would be the center of it, like Marcia
Mm-hmm.
was saying, the very center of it. But so what would be under the ocean, that it's much bigger, of course, then it would be the unconscious for Freud. And we could say the surface of the ocean would be the repression barrier, okay? So for Freud, everything that it's under this surface, so this barrier would be the unconscious. And of course, it's not so different because Jung agree with that in the sense of the personal existing a personal unconscious, but for Jung, there's also what we know, the collective unconscious, but it's for another episode,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think it's very important. Why would the ego uh, why would it want to be a dictator? Uh, well, you talked in the last episode about the inflation of the ego, right? Actually, Marcia and everyone, when we say, "Oh, you are being very narcissistic," but this narcissism we can think as a defense mechanism. Also, it's like the person like protects itself from the outside, of course, from the inner contents that are pressing also, but especially it's when I if I could just hold myself and forget everything, that I have to exchange impressions and I have to be open to other people's opinions and emotions. So when the person is hurt, for instance, we were talking about traumas in childhood,
Right.
especially in childhood, because it's when the ego is being, organized by the personality, or actually developing the personality, sorry. So what happens is that if the ego that it's so frail has a lot of traumas and doesn't know how to deal, and is really threatened of its own existence, then it's going to protect, because we were talking about in the last episode that the narcissism in small children, it's totally normal, because it's a way that the ego is protecting itself, we could say that. But if we go on through life developing, so if we get stuck in childhood in the psychological sense, and we cannot develop empathy and other, and a sense of the other, that it's being different from myself. It's
Could
the
we, sorry to interrupt, could you call it emotional intelligence, or this is completely outside? Because when we talked about empathy, I immediately think about emotional intelligence, right? Not rational intelligence. But when we go into the territory of emotions, it's very dense, right? And for us to learn to intelligently navigate, we need to be able to go through that painful birth that perhaps Joanna was talking about. One of the things that I wanted to bring here, perhaps, and I don't want to distract you, but just to let you know what I'm thinking, is Joanna just published a book, just published maybe 6 months ago, Empty Lives, right? Where somehow, if you read it, and this is really important because you're talking about narcissism as a mechanism that is perfectly healthy for a young child that is still creating, developing the ego, right, as a structural need for us to survive. But in that book, Empty Lives, if you're not aware, you may end up, quote unquote, demonizing social media, because social media leads to exactly what you're saying, Anahy, that a creation of a world that is very curated, that is very well rehearsed, it's very artificial in plastic. So when oh, here's my phone. So when I look at here and I, put take a photo, and oh no, my hair's out of place, delete, let me try again, until it's curated. It is so perfect that I put out there, but we know that is not life. That that sense of rehearsal. Life is not life is after you deleted 100 poses, right? But I think it's lovely what you're talking about. This need to see narcissism as one in many other defense mechanism of the ego.
Yeah, because then the thing is that it's totally normal in childhood. It's part of actually the psyche life in
Hmm.
childhood. But if you have get stuck there, okay, because of a trauma, serious trauma, then you are going that your inner child that will always be with you, because our inner child are always with us, right? It will like be a complex and emotional part, dissociated, in a sense that it has not been assimilated yet, as Joanna was telling us, and in the sentence
Right.
that you brought,
Yeah.
that the ego must assimilate, must hold, must work with these contents, must reflect upon them, must cure, in a sense, to understand the traumas of the inner child and liberate them. Okay? Really understand the different parts of what happened, and so that's the self-discovery process that Joanna says. It's an inner journey. So what happens is that if you get stuck, and if the inner child is very active, And the social media, unfortunately, are doing that to a lot of people. You get stuck. I'm sorry if somebody gets upset, but it's the truth from the psychological point of view, that if it doesn't matter, okay, if you're taking a selfie, to send someone to say, oh, I'm here and everything is fine and this and that, it's something. But if I spend, I'm, for instance, I'm traveling. Just a small episode. I was some years ago, before the pandemic, I was in Italy,
Hmm.
in Pompeii, yeah, and beautiful, the Vulcan and all the stuff. So I was going up, and there were, there were early adults, okay, like in the end of teenage years and early adults, and they were okay, not looking at nature, not talking about the ancient Rome or whatever, or what happened here, the history and all this stuff. They were very worried. They had us the mobiles, and like Marcia said, taking pictures the whole time of themselves together or alone, and so they were not connecting to the here and now. And even to put these pictures in the social media, whatever, the whatever media you have, it won't say anything of what you thought about all the history that you were there, supposedly, because otherwise you could be at home and just put a picture in the back and whatever, okay, if you want. But if I am in some place, and I, of course, I want to, see the nature, see the people, connect to the place, have fun with my friends that are there with me. Otherwise, it's pointless. So it is a narcissistic situation that nowadays our society, it's, and unfortunately the media, social medias, are instigated in especially the children and the teenager, and then the inner child that feels alone. As Joanna said, life is empty, because to give meaning to life, we need ourselves. We need a strong and mature ego that can reflect and connect to the reality, the inner and the outer reality. Okay? Even to change, to reflect upon, philosophy, for God's sake, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Psychology and all the arts. So we say that we are in this moment, in a very narcissistic society, when not everybody, not all the situations, but when we get lost in all this, now I remember that great movie Lost in Translation.
Yes, yes,
Bill Murray and
yes,
Sofia Coppola was the director. It's beautiful.
yes.
It's like we are lost in translation. Okay.
I love it. I love it. We lose ourselves in between the world of being and seeing, and not unable to, do I cognitively, do I understand what's going on? Right? Love it. Love it. What a great
Yeah.
metaphor. Yeah.
And the ego is the center of consciousness. So the ego is selecting, and it's
Hmm.
approving or not what's going to remain in consciousness, and even what we are going to register. So the narcissistic position, I don't register, actually, really, psychologically and emotionally speaking. That's why you remembered emotional intelligence. It's impaired in this kind of situation, our emotion, and doesn't develop well. Okay, our emotional intelligence, and let's remember that there is a spiritual intelligence also. So but even in the emotional part, it's going to be impaired, our emotional intelligence, because I'm not relating to the contents, and I'm not even paying attention to my inner. Let's say, oh, it's hot here, But how the Romans would deal with that 2,000 years ago? Can you imagine the Vulcan, exploding? How people would feel? No,
Yeah.
because I'm worried with my hair. If it looks like this and that, for God's sake, it's
Yes.
so awful to think of this point. So let's, in the Reflecting the Soul, the book that you
Hmm.
that we use as reference, the authors, when they are talking about Joanna's contents, okay, they say something like this: the imperious, they are talking about Joanna. So this is Joanna's quote: the imperious need for survival of the ego, the fear of failing, of not getting it right, of not being considered the greatest or the best, make people create an impeding barrier to the development of the potentialities that lie latent in human beings. Can you imagine? So, all the potentialities that are there in our unconscious, not only the contents that we wouldn't like to pay attention, that we are thinking or feeling, okay, the instincts and all of that, these two presses, from down, we could say, the unconscious up to our consciousness, because actually maturity means that we can live with ourselves, we can accept who we are, and not being proud in a childish sense. We were talking about the hero, right? But to having an ego that can be grateful for all the experiences, the bad and the good experiences that belong to me and that actually make whom I am.
And I think at that point you achieve peace and a sense of I guess the word that comes to mind is fulfillment of being whole again, when we see the ego and the self, right, the inner and the outer, the all the dualities that we face with ourselves. I expected, let's pretend, I expected to be X, and my life journey led me to Y, and it's okay, right? It's okay to deviate. I don't have to create or repress what I have become, perhaps.
Exactly, because don't we all actually want inner peace, as Marcia was saying?
Yeah.
But how can we achieve inner peace? If we accept, and we don't have to who we are, and we don't have to hide ourselves
Mhm.
anymore, and we are not afraid of ourselves anymore, because if we are afraid of ourselves, we are going to project. That's one of other mechanisms of defense that we are going to be talking about soon. So we are going to use some mechanism of defense so that the ego gets rid of this content, of this perception that, for instance, that I'm afraid of myself, of some content that I find that is threatening my image, or the image that I would like to sell to the world. So then the ego will do everything it can to just put this content back to the unconscious. But see what Joanna says, that faced with a socially constructed ideal, Marcia, that you said about the social medias.
Hmm.
And this, nowadays, it looks like a lot of people are not reflecting about that. Many people are in the same room, seeing stuff in their mobiles, in the social media, and not talking to family, to friends. Sometimes they are in restaurants
Yeah.
looking in the mobiles and not talking to. We are so rich of contents, of
Yes.
reflections, of ways of seeing life. Isn't that great if we can exchange all these ideas? It's much better than opening windows or
Yeah.
just doing a Zoom thing in a social media to see what celebrity said this or that, that doesn't mean anything because it doesn't relate to my life. So Joanna says, faced with a socially constructed ideal in some life situations, man is moved by the immature will to
Hmm.
change something in himself or herself.
Yeah.
Uh, Whether it be a desire, a thought, an emotion, an attitude, or feeling that reflects inadequacy. This conflict between what is experienced and what is idealized was wisely identified by Freud and directed him towards understanding the functioning of the personal unconscious.
So it's very beautiful, right? Where she in one statement brings it all together. She brings Freudian psychology, she brings Jungian psychology, she brings spirituality, but most importantly, she understands the problem that we're talking today about our life, ourselves, our youth, and this exaggerated need to narcissistic belong in this society, right? This society of influencers and beautiful and powerful and whatever is that the demands of the external world puts us as the idea of success, that idealized view of where we should be versus the authentic self. Beautiful.
Exactly, exactly. And she says that there is, if we connect to the idea of the unconscious, of course,
Yeah.
because what it's not in consciousness is unconscious to us.
Hmm.
So if it is unconscious and the ego is trying to avoid desperately and losing a lot of energy, because this is psychic energy to do all of this stuff,
Uh-huh.
she says that there is no way to eliminate an imperfection as an act of suppression. You cannot say, this doesn't exist, I'm going to get rid of that. That it's impossible. That's why then we get neurotic if we try to do that, because it's part of us. Doesn't matter
Yes.
what it is, it's part of us. So the most that we can achieve is to withdraw it from conscious mind, but it's going to be there with a lot of energy connected to these contents. Okay, so we have to understand also that's Jung ways of thinking, and also Joanna, when she talks all the time about the evolutionary process
Hmm.
throughout all her works and writings. And Jung says that the soul, the psyche, is teleological, so it's going somewhere. Okay, we say that Jung is very positive because he is the first, I think, to talk in an academic way about the psyche, the soul, and its development, its evolution. It's going somewhere. It's evolving. And so we can think that the unconscious itself moves in order to be made known,
Hmm.
okay, as an impulse of awareness necessary for human evolution, okay. So we should not, we must not run for ourselves, because we are, remember Joseph Campbell, we need the ego as a messenger, as a patroller, as a server, because we need to evolve. We're not evolving taking selfies to put in the social media.
Yeah.
That would not work. We can, okay, say, try, it's a very just, how could I say, just quick way of feeling okay. It's a very small way of feeling okay for some minutes, sometimes not even minutes, because
Seconds. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the next moment I'm thinking, oh, like Marcia said, but my hair was not okay, and I have already put the picture. Or I see it again and oh, that's so awful, I don't look, what my friends are going to say, and this and that.
but I think there's a hit of dopamine, right? Every time you pretend because it's a very superficial way of connecting. Every time somebody likes you, every time you approve of yourself as you show up in an image or in a video, curated or not, then you get that hit of dopamine, and I think that is the cycle that can lead to really an addictive behavior toward my mobile device. I want in leading this, feeding into the narcissistic culture that the Western society has become part of.
Yes, exactly. I agree with you. And so what we should do, right, is not fall in this trap.
Yeah,
Joanna
yeah,
says this, right?
yeah,
Because I think, Marcia, when listening to you, that we can easily get addict,
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah,
addiction. I think
yeah,
we're talking about that,
yeah,
to get stuck in this need.
yeah,
And we have the hormones there in a sense. Oh, I'm feeling so, because I had a lot of likes or something like that. But this will pass, because this is a physiology of the body.
yeah.
So to feel okay with myself, I don't need, I really don't need, to have all this going on all the time, because of the inner peace that you said. Feeling the hormones, it's okay, especially when you are young. You want to feel the rush, adrenaline rush, and things like that. But this will go away, and then you'll have a feeling of emptiness, as Joanna says, right? So to really have, uh, happiness, we have to feel good with ourselves. uh, it's not that we don't need the others, we need each other,
Right.
with each other, but we need to feel good first with ourselves, the other within myself.
Oh,
that
that's
the
beautiful. That's beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah, that the
Yeah.
ego considers an other, but it's really not. It's part of me. So Freud teaches that there are two ways for the ego to try to defend itself from what does not meet its ideal:
Hmm.
repression and resistance. Resistance is more when you are under analysis, so we don't need to talk too much about that. But repression consists of the movement of withdrawing something from consciousness towards the unconscious, as if seeking an introversion, right? So taking something from consciousness, so repressing the content, and sending it back to the unconscious, right?
And this, and this is a defense mechanism that, let's say, if I'm doing that, I'm not even aware that I'm doing that, right? I'm repressing either trauma or something that I am, and it is part of who I am, integral part of who I am, but my ego in me dislikes it, does not feel that is accepted. Maybe, let's say, my sexuality, my preferences, my cultural bent versus this versus the other, and all of those things that I'm unaware of it, and I push it down as I come to my mind, right? I push it down, I repress it, but it's all there. You're doing nothing, but you think you're doing, right? You're becoming free, but you really, in a very paradoxical way, you become a prisoner of your own repression. Is that a correct way to say it?
That's correct. That's great, because it's we say subconsciously also.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost there in consciousness, but remember, the ego is the center of consciousness. So it will allow or not allow contents to be in conscious. It's not the same thing as consciousness, is the center of it. So for something to be in consciousness, that I know that I I recognize, I know it's in my consciousness. The ego has to allow it. So sometimes it doesn't even get to consciousness, okay?
Uh-huh.
Because it's almost there, and the ego, it's very well put, Marcia, because the ego then just uses a defense mechanism. Actually, the repression and the resistance are kind of movements of the ego, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And also we could say a mechanism of defense, of course, but they are this beginning of, no, it's not going to be here, okay? And then we repressed or deny also, like
Right, right.
small denial. It's like we have a small children, right? You are not there, you are not there.
I don't
Okay,
see you. I don't see you,
so
peekaboo. I'm not gonna see you.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a very primitive denial. It's a very primitive mechanism of defense,
Uh-huh.
because it's from early. Also, part of the ego is just beginning to organize itself, and the child's very frail. So it doesn't exist. It's not there because I don't know how to deal with that at all. So it's
Uh-huh.
very primitive. But so this the resistance for quickly is the strength of for the content to remain unconscious. That's why we say it arises under analysis, or in a process like that, psychotherapy and things like that. So these two movements open space for the understanding of the ego's defense mechanism as a way for the ego to protect itself from the onslaught of the unconscious. So all these pressures that are coming from the unconscious, the ego feels threatened and try to, no, you're not there, I'm not going to deal with that, go back to the unconscious. So it is understood that it is impossible to eliminate something that is not good or adequate, whether defects or any other content that displeases the ego. They will be led to the unconscious, and their energy will be withdrawn, but they will be directed to other objects, finding another way to make themselves present. As Marcia was saying, it's going to be there in
Yeah,
your life.
I love what we call, right, when humor is a way to bring to surface certain taboo or indices humor in society. But I always joke about the Freudian, the famous Freudian slip, where we are saying things that shouldn't be said. There are some social filters for you not to say things, and boof, it comes out, and you go, I cannot believe I just said that, right? So I think there's an interesting way to see how there are also, in addition to defense mechanism, also some escape, if you will, mechanism to take away the pressure of all that is repressed.
Yes, and humor is
Y-
actually, it is a mechanism of defense of the ego, but it's considered a, let's say, a very evolved, a mature mechanism of defense, because exactly because of this, you can bring something to light, but in a way that you can deal with. You can, of course, we're not talking, the bad humor
Mhm.
when there's something
Yeah,
um, yeah, not good in the way that the people are making jokes or doing bullying something, but the humor of finding, of course, finding, laughing with some crazy things that we have done or thought, but because it's a way to have insight without
right.
hurting ourselves,
Yes.
and recognize that everybody, we are talking about stuff that everybody does. It's a way that human beings act psychically.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
our psychology.
several meetings ago, and I'm going to derail perhaps, but I think it's coming to my mind. Several meetings ago, we talked about the Oscar incident of a couple of years ago, where the host makes a joke to a famous actress, and he makes a joke of the fact that she's shaved her hair, not knowing that there was a source of extreme pain in that relationship between this person, herself, and her husband, right? So, what's so interesting here in that play dynamic with Chris Rock and Will Smith and his wife, Jada, was the fact that, especially for African American culture, hair, there's so much density of meaning into having a full head of hair, etc. So that's number one. But number two is the fact that through that almost bullying, right? Playing a joke into something, putting her down. The third actor in this play, comes in, and I can just see his ego, like, how could you diminish me in all my power as the Oscar winning, in that case, Oscar winning actor, and you're putting me down. Therefore, I want to kill you, slap you, whatever. And unbeknownst to all of us, he comes up and he does it. Interesting enough, Anahy, I just, after we talked, I got to see that he, the actor, had done an interview not so long prior to that, where he had been going through a 2 year inner journey about his. This is so adequate to this conversation. I'm thinking now, but he had been this 2 year journey on all his fears, and including taking, I think it's called ayahuasca, right, where you take, and it's
Yeah.
hallucinatory, and you have all of these things coming out. But he went through this journey, and his fears were, I'm losing my wife, I'm losing my children, I'm losing my power, my influence, my likability. He's known to be one of the most likable actors in Hollywood. And this is the fears that, interesting enough, he enacts not so long later after that interview. He enacts and he loses, and he almost actually lost his relationship and the appreciation of the population, and so on and so forth. So I think it's very interesting why, right, the mechanism of defense, which would be the ego saying, I need to protect my wife and this, and at the same time did not see that it was not protecting the sense of belonging and looking good. It's just interesting aspect of this discussion, right? The antagonistic forces that the ego uses to protect oneself, and at the same time, in this case, exposing himself to lose it all, so that he could indeed face all his fears, right?
So
So I
I
think
think,
you're talking earlier about St. Francis being the personification of exactly that journey. Can you talk to us a little bit more about
yeah,
how, losing it all, he found himself?
yeah, but I think first of this actor and this situation, the
Yeah.
Oscar situation, it's a very good example of one of the most common mechanism of defense
Mm-hmm.
that we it's so widely used by all of us that in psychotherapy, for instance, one important part of the treatment is helping the person to identify his or her projections, because the mechanism is projection. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see, it is a mechanism in which the person wants to expel qualities, feelings, desires, etc., which are refused by the ego, and locates them in the other. Here, everything that is painful would be experienced as non-ego. The other is doing that to me.
I
And
see.
therefore, we would need to locate it in someone else. So this is a very good example of projection. If the ego has to be correct and good, as you're saying about the actor that we all love, the movies and all the stuff, then the other, whoever he she may be, will become the bearer of all the evil that I
Yeah.
fail to recognize in myself,
Yes.
right? For Joanna, the projection achieves surprising reactions, as you are saying.
Yeah.
Every time someone fights with that exaggerated vehemence
Yeah.
certain traits of another's character, he projects himself or herself onto the other, transferring from the ego the negative quality that is peculiar to it. Then the ego makes its victim the mirror in which it is unconsciously reflected, evading the acceptance of its errors and the responsibility for them. So, this is very important. For instance, paranoia,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Where we have an inner persecutor, actually, something, and usually it's always according to Freud, but not always. We can have traumas all around, um, our life cycle, okay? But of course, because the ego is so frail in childhood and adolescence, we have to take care, because there is where mostly we can get stuck in difficult situations. So, for instance, but anyway, if I'm doing something, and you talked, Marcia, about psychedelics and psychotherapy, and
Yeah.
I think we should pay a lot of attention for that, because uh, exactly, psychotherapy analysis are ways of structuring the ego, maturing
Right.
the ego, so it can face help, like Joseph Campbell says, help us to serve
Mm.
the psyche, right? Serve our evolutionary process. And if we try to bypass the ego, right, putting the having an altered state of consciousness, and maybe this happened to him, to this actor,
Yeah.
because if the ego was not strong enough yet to deal with the inner persecutor, like fears or things like that, or other inner images, complexes, whatever, that were threatening the ego. What I do many times is, like, there is a trigger, there's always a trigger, a guy that was bullying. But of course, the guy that was bullying was also projecting something.
Right.
Everybody was projecting in
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
So for different reasons, because of the conscious the unconscious contents of
Yes.
everyone
Yeah.
involved. So what you do, if you don't recognize that you have, for instance, those fears, to get your to go back to your example, then you are going to create an inner persecutor, for instance, because you are repressing, denying, whatever. So you are going to have to project, because the energy is there, and
Yeah.
you're going to have to project in somebody. So that guy was persecuting him, let's say, in psychologically speaking, because was bullying, was threatening his image,
Yes.
was
Yeah.
bringing to light in a very sudden way, when of course he was emotional and all this stuff, the actor. So the other guy who was bullying was bringing to life, to light, um, persecuting all those fears, okay? So, but that was projection. You see that Joanna says, with every time someone fights with exaggerated vehemence,
Correct. Correct.
right? It's exaggerated because the guy was being very, not only impolite, was showing all this, awful traits of character.
Yeah.
So if I just don't connect to that, it's not mine, it's your problem.
Yeah.
The jealousy, for instance, or whatever, because it
Yes.
was not humor. That's not humor.
Yeah.
That's of course projection and
Yeah.
aggressiveness disguised as humor.
Yeah.
So if I don't connect to that, I am in contact with my contents. I don't have to project. So that doesn't belong to me. Then I wouldn't have, for instance, so such a strong emotional response. I can be, of course, not happy with the thing, but I can understand that it doesn't belong to me. I won't say anything. I will go there, and you were being very impolite, but if you think this is humorous, that's your problem, not mine.
Correct. Yeah.
And goodbye, or whatever, or
Yeah.
say the message that was more important, thanks to my wife and everybody that has the same problem, have
Hmm.
hope because medicine, this and that, then would be positive. But then you would have to have already deal with those contents. So a message that I want to leave to everyone, that's just a small insight in the mechanism of defense. Let's not be afraid of ourselves. Let's go, like Joanna is telling us, with courage, facing ourselves with strong and mature egos, so we can evolve all together and not project or repress or deny so much, onto others.
And it's a just quoting back with my own words. It's a hero's journey, right? As Joseph Campbell talked about it. We are at the end of our talk today. We'll meet again in the few weeks. Anahy, just wanted to give the just a one sentence to tell everybody that if you can read about Saint Francis and Saint Clare in their personification of how they're able to let go of the ego and in get in touch with their own consciousness. We'll maybe bring that again, Anahy. And
And
also,
just
I
to say
think,
goodbye, just to say goodbye. I
yes,
remember now that you asked me, it's so
yeah,
much things to talk
yeah,
about that I forgot. I wanted to give you all to take home one sentence of Jung that I think it's what St. Francis, also went through. Jung says, I'm not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become.
love it,
He
love it.
chose, St. Francis chose to become St. Francis in a way, going through this inner journey and connecting with his higher self.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we are at the end. I just want to say thank you, Anahy. Thank you, everyone who was able to join us today or in the future. And this amazing time together is wonderful. I appreciate you, Anahy, and I appreciate all of you who can join us on a weekly basis. Goodbye.
Bye bye, everyone.